We now change gear. We've got a sort of punchy half an hour in which we've got to hear from Jason Clare. You might have heard of him, and Harlene Haynes, who is intimately connected with the Australian Centre for Student Equity. This pair doesn't really need much of an introduction, but let me just make two very quick observations. I don't want to eat into their time. I think it's pretty clear to see that Jason has had the vision to think more boldly about what higher education, or may I say education generally, can do for this country. It's been a long time since we've had an education minister that can sort of challenge the sector to expand and think beyond what it's been doing in the past, to actually begin to catch up with the kind of reforms we're seeing in higher education and the knowledge economy globally, certainly within this region. So I think his track record in that sense speaks for himself. He's also been an enormous supporter of the centre that I lead and the approach of taking an evidence-based approach to these challenges in the future. So thank you very much for Jason. He'll go into his sort of formal comments in a moment. Harlene, of course, doesn't need very much introduction. Amongst other things, she's the Vice-Chancellor of Curtin, previously Otago in New Zealand, but also Chair of the Australian Technological Universities Network, and last and not least, Chair of the Advisory Board of the centre that I lead. Enormous practical supporter of all of these ideas, all of this evidence, and being put into action on a daily basis. So I'll hand over to Jason with his formal address. We'll structure this around, I think, 15 minutes hearing from the Minister, and then Harlene will chair and moderate a session of 15 minutes Q&A. Jason.
G'day everyone. Thanks Shamit, and thanks Harlene. I go to lots of conferences, usually standing here at the lectern trying to seem smart. And this is the first time that I've been at a conference where students are on the stage, sharing their wisdom and their knowledge. And it shouldn't be unusual, but it is. Plenty of middle-aged white blokes get up here and prognosticate not enough of the future of this nation. And so to walk into the room and get a chance to listen to the really important people, what this sector is all about, fills me with confidence that what you're doing, Shamit, is right. And I hope that at more conferences I get to go to, I hear more students speak and impart their wisdom to us. Can I start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. When I got this job a bit over 3 years ago, I think I made it pretty clear what I thought the main game was. And that's opening the doors of our universities to more people like the young people that I grew up with. Kids who thought that university wasn't for them. And I remember when I said it, most people in the audience nodded. They told me I was right afterwards. And in a sense, it's hard not to agree. It's hard to argue against fairness. It's hard to argue that our education is what it really could be. Think about this for a second. If you're a child from a poor family today, you're less likely to make it to university. You're also less likely to make it to the end of high school. You're also more likely to start school behind or fall behind. And you're less likely to even get a chance to go to preschool or to childcare. It's all connected. It's the same if you grow up in the regions or the bush. Even more so if you're Indigenous. Now, you might have been able to make an argument 50 years ago that this sort of unfairness is somehow okay because of the sort of workforce that we had back then. But not today, and not in the world that our children will inherit. More and more jobs are going to require more and more skills. And if a big group of Australians are locked out of that, then it won't just hurt them as individuals, it'll hurt us, all of us. We will all be poorer because we'll be part of an economy that can't get out of second gear, that doesn't have the people power that it needs. And what I want to put to you is that that is basically what the Accord tells us. That opening the doors of our universities wider isn't just the right thing to do, but it's what we have to do. What it says is that in 25 years, 80% of the workforce will need a tertiary qualification, a certificate, a diploma, or a degree, or a micro-credential. And to put that in perspective, today that's 60%. That's a big leap from 3 out of 5 people in the workforce with that tertiary qualification today to 4 out of 5 in 25 years' time. Now, where do you think that extra 20% is going to come from? It's not going to come from Mossman or Toorak or Peppermint Grove. Most people there already have a tertiary qualification. It's going to come from breaking down that invisible barrier that stops so many young people in our outer suburbs and our regions from getting to university in the first place, and then succeeding when they get there. What this centre talks about all the time: access and success. Got to pronounce that better. Success. And that requires reform to the entire education system. We took the first steps in the budget last year, and I remember speaking at this conference just a week after the budget. In that budget were the first bits of the accord that we bit off. One of those was making it easier for people who aren't ready to do a university degree to get ready. We're doing that by massively expanding funding for what are sometimes called enabling courses, those free bridging courses that give you the skills you need to do a university degree. And last year I mentioned Newcastle University. They've been doing this now for over 50 years. Incredibly, 1 in 5 people that get a degree from Newcastle today start with one of these free bridging courses. And last year I told you the story of Jennifer Baker, the young mum who saw an ad for one of these courses in the newspaper and is now a Fulbright scholar. Here's a couple more. Roy Turner dropped out of high school in year 10 and he became a fitter and machinist, and he worked in the oil and the gas industry until COVID hit and he lost his job. And that's when his fiancée said to him, "Why don't you do one of these free courses?" He did, and now he's doing a degree in medical engineering. Here's another one. Z Johnson did one of these free courses at the age of 48 when she was at home, a full-time carer for her partner who just suffered a stroke. Now she's got a degree in biomedical science. This year she completed an honours degree in ovarian cancer research. Next is a PhD. So from pension to PhD. If you want to know what uncapping funding for these free courses means, it means about an extra $1 billion over the next 10 years. But more than that, what it really means is more people like Roy and more people like Z at university. In that budget last year was also paid prac. For the first time, the Australian government is investing in financial support for students while they do their practical training, specifically teaching students, nursing students, midwifery students and social work students. And it's about an extra $1.4 billion over the next 10 years. It's means tested, it's targeted at the people who need it most. It's targeted at what I suspect a lot of people in this room would be familiar with, or at least have heard of, and that's placement poverty. I was here at UTS, incidentally, last year to talk about it, and I met a first-year midwifery student named Clare. And this is what she told me, this is what she told the TV cameras that day. "I'm a first-year mature-age midwifery student. This payment is going to be absolutely life-changing for me. As a mother of 2 small children, I'm often balancing between practical work, placement, and looking after my babies. There are literally some days where I'm doing 16-hour days between my study and my work and looking after my children. I can't wait for this payment to be available for myself and for other future mature-age students who might also want to enrol in this course, who previously couldn't financially afford it." That's why we're doing this, for people like Clare. And it's now started. It started on the 1st of July, and already more than 30,000 students across the country have applied for it. In the last 12 months, we've also begun to roll out university study hubs in the regions and in the outer suburbs of our big cities. And there's more that will open in the next few months. I told you last year when we were at Bankstown for this conference what it meant to have the word university on a building in a place like the one that I grew up in. The message that it sends to kids there that they belong at university and that it's for them too. I was in the northern suburbs of Melbourne a couple of weeks ago at Broadmeadows to open a hub there with the team from La Trobe University, and there was a law student there who spoke named Tori, and she talked about her family. She talked about the fact that her dad hadn't finished year 9, and she talked about how it would take her 2 hours one way to get to university by bus. Not anymore. Now it's a 10-minute walk. And this is what she said: "It makes me feel like my university wants me to study, and it makes me feel really seen. And also I feel really safe here, and being able to study and feel safe just lets my confidence and my concentration peak." As somebody who remembers that 1.5 hour commute from Cabramatta to Central Station and the bus from Eddy Avenue out to Randwick and back, I get it. It's part of the reason why I fought for this. It's what these hubs do. It saves you time, saves you money, it makes it easier to get to that part-time job after or before university. They also make it easier for people to go back and to study after you've had children as well. I guess I learnt that at Broadmeadows because that hub's next door to a childcare centre, and I was told the busiest time for the hub is just after the children have been dropped off at the childcare centre. They make people like Tori feel like they belong. All of that, the bridging courses, the paid prac, the study hubs, have started to roll out this year. And we've also done something else. We've quadrupled the amount of funding to help more students with a disability to access and participate in higher education. That is significant. In the last 12 months, we've also done something else that has never happened before. We've signed agreements with every state and territory to finally fully fund every public school in the country. Not everything that we're trying to fix here at this conference, if we're going to be truthful with each other, can be fixed at the gate of the university. As I said earlier, we've got to reform the entire education system. And this, I think, is the big one. If we want more Australians to take on a university degree, then we need more young people to finish high school. And again, this is a problem that isn't everywhere. In independent and Catholic schools, completion rates are high and going up, or at the very least stable. It's in our public schools where the real challenge is, and it's where a lot of the heavy lifting happens. In the last 10 years, the percentage of young people finishing high school has dropped in public schools from about 83% to about 73%. The agreements that I've signed are about turning this around. It's a $16 billion investment over the next 10 years. And to put that in perspective, it's about triple that in the decade after that. And none of this is a blank cheque. That funding is tied to reform. I said these are the schools where the heavy lifting happens, the schools that play an outsized role in educating some of the most disadvantaged children in this country. Children who we know are more likely to start school behind or fall behind once they get there, through no fault of their own. This funding is tied to reform to help them to catch up, to keep up, and help more young people finish high school so they get that chance to go to university, to go to vocational education. And so it's invested in things like evidence-based teaching, like phonics checks and numeracy checks in kindergarten or year 1 to identify children who need additional help, and then making sure that they get that additional help through things like more individualised support, things like catch-up or small group tutoring. This is a historic moment, I think, with all states and territories now signed up to these agreements. And to help us now in the task of making it real, of lifting these commitments off the page, of implementing these reforms and hitting these targets, I've written to my state and territory colleagues proposing that we bring together the work of 4 agencies: ACARA, the Australian Curriculum Assessment and Reporting Authority, ACSES, the Australian Institute for Teaching and School Leadership, AERO, the Australian Education Research Organisation, and ESA, Education Services Australia, to be all put under one roof. What I'm proposing is a new Teaching and Learning Commission that would maintain and protect the critical work that these organisations do today and improve their coordination. But in addition to that, to help us to implement the reforms and to hit the targets that we're all committed to, that all states and territories have signed up to, and oversee and to drive the reforms that we're making to initial teacher education, to help build the workforce that we need and raise esteem for what I think is the most important job in the world. I don't know if Sam's still here. He was on the stage a minute ago. Where are you, mate? It's lovely to see you again. I only disagreed with one word that you said on the stage, and that was the word just. Never say just a teacher, because being an educator, whether it's little kids or big kids, that's the most important thing you can do with your life. That's the most important job in the world. And if you become a chemistry teacher one day in a high school, whether it's in the city or in the bush, then that will be the most important thing you ever do with your life. And you'll inspire other people to be just like you, mate. So it's lovely to see you again, and all the best wishes for the future. So all of this, the idea of bringing these together under one roof, is something that I'll put on the table for education ministers to talk about when we meet next month. That's school education. Forgive me, I just want to talk briefly before I head back to universities to what we're doing and what we need to do in early education. Because earlier this year we did something else. We know that children from disadvantaged backgrounds are more likely to start school behind other children. We also know they're less likely to go to early education and care than other children as well. And one of the reasons for that is a thing called the activity test. This is a test that stops children from some of the poorest families in the country from getting access to the childcare subsidy. The reason is because their parents don't work enough hours or aren't studying enough hours, and as a result, their children miss out. That ends at the start of next year. From the 1st of January next year, the activity test goes and gets replaced with a 3-day guarantee, 3 days a week access to the childcare subsidy for every child who needs it. Why? Well, I want you to think about what early education really is. No one blinks when you say that every child has a right to go to school and that government has a responsibility to help fund it. And given everything that we know now about the way the human brain develops and how important it is that young people start school ready to learn, I think the same has got to be true today for early education. Now, that doesn't mean it has to be compulsory, but it should be there for every parent who wants it and for every child who needs it, to help to make sure that these children, like all children, are better prepared and ready to start to learn when they start school. It's the sort of change that can change lives. And it's the next step in what the Prime Minister talks about in building a universal early education system. And if we do that, and if we get that right, well, then anything's possible. Now, just finally, let me take you back to university and what comes next there. Because next year we start to turn on what I think are the big equity engines in the Accord. Next year, needs-based funding starts. Now, to understand that, think Gonski for universities. The school funding system provides schools with extra funding based on where they're located and the needs of the students that they educate. Students who come from economically disadvantaged families receive additional support, and so do schools in the regions and the bush. At the moment, we have programs like HEP that provide extra funding for student support. But this is different. This will be different. This isn't a capped program, it's demand-driven. So the money follows the student. The more students a university has that meet the criteria, the more funding they'll receive. The more students there are at regional universities, the more funding those universities will receive as well. And that starts next year. That's just a couple of months away. The year after that, 2027, a new type of demand-driven system starts. Last year we brought back a demand-driven system for Indigenous students. It doesn't mean the university's free, but what it does mean is if you get the marks for the course that you want to do, well then you've got a guaranteed place at university. That started last year and it's already having a positive impact. Indigenous enrolments were up about 5% last year and another 3% this year. Over the next 10 years, we think that this could double the number of Indigenous students at university. The next step is to do the same sort of thing for students from other disadvantaged backgrounds. Effectively, a demand-driven system for all students from disadvantaged backgrounds. Now think about these two things together, or these two things working together. A demand-driven system for disadvantaged students to get them in the door, and a demand-driven needs-based funding system to get them through. Help to get in, help to get through. Access and success. And I expect to introduce legislation to do that next year. And the new Australian Tertiary Education Commission that we will also introduce legislation to formally create will be given the responsibility to drive this. So I hope you can see from what I've talked about today that there's a little bit happening and that my focus hasn't shifted. I still think this is the main game, and I know that there is a lot more work to do, but we've made a start, and that we've got a chance in the next few years to cement all of this in and to build on it, to build a better and a fairer education system, and in the process build a better and a fairer country as well. And the work that you, Shamit, and your team do is a critical part of that. I believe that. That's why I support it, not just with words, but with dollars. And I want to thank you for it. And I'm so very, very grateful that you've invited me back to speak again today. Thanks very much.
You're sitting. Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to come and speak with us today. I thought before I started asking you some questions, I would just remind the audience that the reason that we're all here is actually due to Minister Clare. The refocusing of ACSES was actually Minister Clare's idea to take what was NESHE at the time, which was a very well-respected, very well-regarded center that was focused on producing academic research about issues regarding equity into a center that now is designed to evaluate the kinds of programs that are currently happening in our universities, essentially turning it into a what works center. So the fact that we are all here is due to Minister Clare. So on behalf of everyone here, I'd like to thank you very much for that. Before I go to the questions on Slido, you did mention the issue of ATEC, and I'm very well aware of the fact that at the Vice Chancellor and Deputy Vice Chancellor level, there's been a lot of discussion about ATEC and what it's going to do, but I suspect that many of the practitioners in the room haven't been part of those conversations. So I'm wondering if you could briefly let the audience know how you see ATEC as facilitating your mission with respect to increase access and success of equity students.
This emerged out of the discussions in developing the Accord back in 2023, and I'm conscious that there was a previous iteration of this many, many years ago. There was a bloke called John Curtin, I remember, who created a Universities Commission. Funny that. I think the origin of the idea in the context of the consultations we did on the Accord led by Mary O'Kane was that too often, almost always, when a big piece of thinking is done to reform or transform a part of the economy, that governments will pick off parts of it and then the caravan moves on and some of the bigger, hardier, knottier problems in the sector are lost or forgotten. And I want to make sure that that's not the case here, and I know that the team that led the Accord work think like that as well. Now that can happen either because there's a change of government or even if there's a change of minister and they've got different priorities. At its simplest, what the ATEC, this tertiary education, offers us is a steward for the sector over the next decade and beyond. And a way to make sure, it's not about necessarily keeping governments honest, but it's about keeping governments aware of the big challenges in the sector and the big unfinished business in the Accord. You know, I said that we'd bitten a big part of it off, but everybody here knows that not all of the Accord has been bitten off. We should also be conscious that the Accord is a product of a big piece of work in 2023, and it doesn't necessarily have all the answers for 2030 or 2035. There are things that are on my radar that I'm conscious the Accord never got to, or the Accord might not have got right, or the Accord never thought of. And so this gives us a living process to be able to constantly provide feedback to people in my position about not just what haven't we done in the Accord that we need to do, but what else should we be thinking of doing. So that's at a big blue sky level. At a one-on-one level with universities, the work that the Accord do and will do with people in positions like yours will be about developing compacts for universities next year about, I guess at the nitty-gritty level it's about money, but it's also about purpose and focus. I was asked this question at the AFR conference where there weren't students on stage, and hopefully there will be next year. And that was that, look, universities all look the same. Politicians always talk about them being different, but it never happens. And I'm not imagining that in 12 months' time universities will be fundamentally different to what they look like today. But the model of the ATEC provides us with that, that potential that people like Glyn Davis and others have talked about, that in the future we do have an ecosystem which looks different than it does today. Not worse, better, but different and potentially a little bit more specialised.
Great. Thank you. Speaking of unfinished business in the Accord, the most popular question on the Slido right now is, where are we with looking at the job-ready graduates?
Yeah. And funny you should ask me.
I know.
It's an obvious question to ask because people know that the job-ready graduate scheme has failed. And I think most people knew it would fail when it was initiated by the former government. The idea, one of the young men on the stage was asked about HECS and he said, well, I don't really think about that yet because that's a deferred payment. And that's not an uncommon answer because, g'day Sarah, how are you? Because it's something that when you think about what you're going to study at university, you think about what you love, what your passion is, what you're interested in, what you're good at, or at least I hope you do. I hope people don't pick subjects based on what the student debt level is. But it is a fundamental part of your education because you have to pay it off afterwards. And we looked at that as part of the Accord. Andrew's here. I remember Andrew in the panel at Bankstown, you were talking about how a better, fairer model for student debt is one that recognises that different people earn different amounts depending upon the profession that they enter into, and that the system should reflect that. It doesn't at the moment. There are recommendations about how we fix that in the Accord. Well, there's a whole suite of recommendations about student debt. We've done some of them, we haven't done this yet. They touched on it at a higher level, I think, in the Accord, but they didn't dive as deep into it as we probably need to. So there's more work that needs to be done. I don't use that as an excuse, but I have been honest enough to say that fixing this is going to require a significant investment by government. And I had, to be very, very frank with you, choices to make when I presented the case to government about what do we do first in the Accord. And I gave you some dollar figures today in terms of what the bridging courses are worth, what paid prac's worth. When you add in the managed growth system and needs-based funding, all up, that's about bit more than $6.5 billion of additional dollars into the system over the next decade. if you were to do JRG and reverse out the changes to humanities, but not make not increase the cost of teaching or nursing degrees, you're talking about something like an extra $1 billion a year into the system, so 10 billion. So I made a conscious decision that I needed to, and this is an unfair statement in the sense that changes to JRG have an impact on equity students, because there are a lot of young people from disadvantaged backgrounds who do humanities courses. But in investing first in paid prac, in bridging courses, in the hubs, in managed growth and in needs-based funding, I made the deliberate decision to start there, because I thought that's where I would have the biggest impact on shifting the dial in some of these equity numbers.
Great. Obviously, there's a lot of anxiety in the room on the basis of the questions around funding of universities. It's in the forefront of many people's minds, which I'm sure it is in your mind as well when we're looking at the large wholesale number of redundancies that are happening across the sector. So many of the questions that we have here are really about funding. I think one of the big anxieties in the group is about how we are going to fund outreach going forward.
Yeah.
So again, this may be a level of detail that sits with the department and not necessarily with you, but the question is, the HEP funding, we used to be able to use that in order to raise aspirations and outreach, and now that outreach is going to be funded differently. Are you worried at all about how that change in the funding mechanism might influence our ability to touch communities outside of the greater metropolitan areas?
Oh, well, I want to make sure that outreach continues, if not being expanded. If we're going to encourage young people at high school to think about university, then they have to see it. And if they can't see it on the skyline of their local suburb, then you need to find a way for them to experience it. And, you know, I think about that from my own personal experience. The first time I went to university was the first day I went to university. And for a lot of young people I went to school with, they just thought university was for other kids. And if you get a chance to either study there after school, or you get a chance to visit a university, or if university comes to you, then it can break down that invisible barrier that you might have in your own head about whether you're potentially somebody who could go to university. And I know that in the advisory group that helped us with the design features of needs-based funding, they were very keen to make sure that there was funding available there for outreach. That doesn't mean that the job is done, though. We held a roundtable recently ahead of the economic roundtable that the Treasurer hosted in Canberra, and in that conversation was, from a number of participants, the need for us to focus more on outreach, but in addition to that, on how we do careers advice better in our schools, not just at high school, but in primary schools, not just at school, but after school as well, because for many people who work in universities here, you'll be very conscious that even though I've concentrated in my remarks a lot about young people, I did give some examples of mature age students. And many of our universities tell me that 30-40% of their students are not students who've just come straight out of high school. They've come to university later in life. Is Curtin?
50% of Curtin students are not school leavers.
50, okay.
Thank you very much. Given the breadth of your portfolio, from early childhood all the way through to university and other forms of higher education, have you given any thought about how we can help parents along this journey in supporting their young people? I mean, it's a great initiative to have 3 days of supported childcare in communities where people may not necessarily be able to afford that. Are there other initiatives that the universities could participate in that would help students to see that university is a place for them? I mean, like you, I stepped foot on my university campus. That was the first university I'd ever stepped foot on the day that I went. So there are many university leaders who have had a very similar journey, coming from disadvantaged backgrounds, from rural, regional, and remote backgrounds. So are there ways, I'm thinking about my own parents who were quite keen for me to get a university education but didn't have a clue about how I was going to do it or how I was going to get there. Are there things that we can do to help those parents who are motivated for their young people to receive a university education, to get that information that they can help along the way?
Well, I think it's for mums and dads who are thinking about it and are hoping that their children will go to university, but it's also the mums and dads who may not even have it on their radar. So there'll be young people at high school today whose parents went to university, and they benefit from those conversations at home where mum and dad can tell them what university was like. You know, I've got little children, but I think about that conversation that I can have with them when they grow up, and they already know what the word university is. That was nothing. That was never mentioned at home when I was little. So, you know, the big fella Jack, who's 8, he knows what university is. Even though I represent a community where there is a lot of disadvantage and a lot of families who are first generation Australians, there are a lot of families who are super ambitious for their children to go to university. I think one of the things I try to tell students when I visit high schools, and try to tell their parents as well, who are putting the pressure on them, is that there's more than one way to get to university. Because I didn't have that family background, I thought that if I didn't get the mark I needed in the HSC, my life was over. And then second year of law school at the University of New South Wales, there were all new students in my class, and I thought, where did you come from? And I realised that they didn't get into law in year 1, but they went into another degree and then they transferred. And so helping parents, helping students who are ambitious to go to university to understand how the different pathways and the systems work, and that you know, all of the pressure that young people put on themselves and that parents sometimes put on their children is sometimes a little bit misplaced. Think about all of the mental health challenges that young people experience at the moment, both at school and university, and if we can try and take some of that pressure off with a bit better understanding of the way the system works. I don't know whether you do that through your outreach programs, but that can be handy and helpful. And then there's another group of families who might think, like my friends thought, that university was for the other children. And I don't want us to be a country like that. But we are at the moment. And so there is an important role, I think, for universities to play when they walk in the school door, to find those children and make sure that they don't miss out.
You've been very generous with your time, Minister. I might close with one question about the sector more generally. There is quite a bit of strife going on with respect to a number of challenges that universities are facing. Is there one piece of advice that you would give everybody here about how collectively we're going to make our way through this somewhat challenging period with issues regarding student safety, with respect to governance, with respect to job cuts? It does feel like being inside the sector, and I know many of the people in this room would share those concerns, it does feel like we're a sector under attack right now. Yet everyone in this room gets up every morning with the sole purpose of making sure that students have a really fair go. Is there a way that we can see the bright side on the other end of this?
So I was at a high school just before this, and I was visiting the school leaders at the school. They're in year 12, they've just been given an early offer, and I said, where are you going? And both of them said, we're going to study law at ANU. Now, I tell you that story because, you know, of all of the challenging issues at the moment, ANU is in the media the most. Did it discourage those extremely bright young women from wanting to be lawyers and to go to ANU and to use that as the springboard into whatever? You know, they could be ambassadors representing our country in a couple of decades' time. No. So we often see things on the front pages of newspapers and all of the sort of the civil war that the sector can sometimes get fixated with, and think about that we're all just being consumed by that, and the sector thinks that nobody loves it. I hope you see in my speech that I think both the sector, the school system, the education system is the most powerful cause for good in this country. That those student leaders didn't read the newspaper, they saw a pathway to a better future. And in everything that I try to do in my role here, I try to create that environment. It would be very easy for me as a minister to just treat the sector as a political punching bag. And sometimes I'm accused of that. I hope that you see in the words that I use and the way in which I interact with everyone in the sector, whether it's vice-chancellors or whether it's academics or whether it's students, the whole ecosystem, that I deliberately avoid doing that. And sometimes in public and more often in private, I try to use my influence to encourage the leaders in this sector to lean into where I think reform needs to happen, because good reform, long-lasting reform, only happens if it grows internally. Sure, you can impose something for a short period of time, but it doesn't last. And so, one of the most refreshing things from my point of view in the last couple of months since I got reappointed to this job is the relationship that I've got with the new Shadow Minister for Education, John O'Doniam. I'm not telling any secrets out of school that the relationship with the former Shadow Minister wasn't what I would have liked it to have been. Not for me, I'm not important in this. What's important is the sector and the system and the conversation that happens in the media. And I said at the AFR conference, and I mean it, John is a very serious person, a real considered person. He looks at this and thinks, well, maybe I might be the Education Minister one day. What can I learn right now to make sure I be a good Education Minister? And in everything that I'm doing here, I'm conscious that I'm the custodian of this role for a very short period of time. Someone else will be in my shoes one day, and I'm hoping that they'll see in what I've done something that they can build on rather than something that they want to tear down. Because I want to make sure that I'm leaving the system in a better place than what I found it. And there'd be nothing more frustrating for the whole sector than to do all of this work and then have it all ripped apart and redone anew. So collaboration, listening to each other, talking to each other, whether it's the Labor Party and the Liberal Party, or whether it's the leaders in this room and outside this room working with me and my team and the ATEC, that's the key. There's always going to be bad headlines and concern within the system that it's under attack. Look through that and think about those young women that are heading off to ANU.
Great. Thank you very much. And I know that I can speak on behalf of everyone here that we're all on the team Accord, and that irrespective of a change in government or a change in minister, that we will be continuing to fight quite vociferously for the support of our equity students. Could you please all join me in thanking Minister Clare for his address and his questions today?